All right, so I'm delighted to introduce our final speaker for today's symposium, Geoffrey Canada. Geoffrey is president of the Harlem's Children's Zone, and he's really been a transformational role as a key advocate in driving education reform in the U.S. His efforts to improve and reform education in America has led to numerous awards, including being named to Time Magazine's Most Influential People and Fortune's 50th Greatest World Leaders. We're delighted to have Geoffrey close our symposium with a discussion on children and toxic stress, a generation at risk. Geoffrey.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I have had such a great day. I'm so happy I'm not a scientist. Can I just tell you all that? Because you have to prove everything you say. I can say anything I want. I'm not a scientist. I don't have to prove anything. My best thoughts, that's just it. That's what you get. So this is something Barbara knows. The moment she mentioned at our board meeting that she was interested in this subject of toxic stress, I just went nuts. I've been obsessed with this issue. I am 100% convinced that those of you who are doing this really detailed, tough research are right, because I knew it 25 years ago. That's a joke, all right? But I did. It's funny. You know, sometimes your life experiences aren't real. They're just personal, what you experience. It really has nothing to do with the reality. And sometimes your life experience actually reflect a reality that other people, including scientists, may not be aware of. When I was listening to Nadine talk about ACEs, 4+, that was my neighborhood. That was my family. That was my friends. That's what we knew. That was the norm of my existence. And what I saw from that experience influenced my life and changed my life forever. And I never thought that, folks would be interested in the work, the president would replicate the work, Fortune magazine, or, I do have to say this, Barbara knows my wife. I do have to say this about Fortune magazine. So they name me like number 17 most influential person in the world, right? And I get a stack of these magazines, and I take them home to my wife, right? And I'm like, she's a Harlem girl. I'm like, turn to page 37. So she looks at it, and she says, "You couldn't even make the top 10, huh?" And I was just like, oh, well, there goes that. But I will tell you this. I was a funny kid. I was one of those kids that was living in a reality while reading about an opposite reality, which some people might call normal, right? Except it really wasn't normal, but we thought it was normal. So this is what it looked like for me. Now I'm living in the midst of the hood in the South Bronx, and I'm reading about Dick and Jane. Now you have to be old. Some of you young folks, y'all don't have any idea what I'm talking about, right? Because they lived in the suburbs. They had a white picket fence. They had a little dog Spot, and he jumped, right? Spot would run. The dogs in the South Bronx were pretty vicious. They weren't like Spot. I gotta say, I want to go to that place over there. Everything was bright and sunny and good. All I saw was dark and scary and sad. And I just thought to myself, how do you draw the short straw to end up in this place? So I was obsessed with this. And when I wrote my first book, Fistic Knife Gun, that was more than 25 years ago, I was talking about the impact that violence had on these poor communities around the country. And I talked a lot about my experience with it. But I want to make kind of maybe a challenging statement to all of the scientists and all of the folks working in this work. Poverty might make you depressed for good reasons. It might deprive you of initiative it might make it so that you can't focus on your children or care in an appropriate way. And if that is true, even if you help a parent in those early years get through, you may not have solved the problem. And that is what my experience showed me over and over and over again. That one of the real problems with being poor in America is that this thing can upset your life anywhere on your lifespan. I don't care, from infancy right through to adulthood, your whole life could be destroyed in a second. And we, those of us who care about this issue, we have to be sure that we're positioning what we're doing in a way that it's going to be able to actually be successful. And that means we've got to tackle some of these bigger issues. And I was listening to Secretary Lew. I just couldn't agree with you more about how we have to think about this as policy. But let me first start talking about this issue. So this is my introduction to the limits of great parenting. I had a good mother. Where's Nadine? There's Nadine. I love Nadine. She's great. Nadine, we had the bear in our house. That scary bear was my father. He was an alcoholic. My mother did the right thing. She kicked him out the house. She got him out. I was about 3. She raised 4 boys by herself. Now look, that sounds like a good story. Now she's a single mom with 4 boys, very little income, in a place that's dangerous and threatening, and she's trying to figure this out by herself, right? So here was one of my first introductions to how a place matters. So I'm 3, my next brother is 4, my other brother is 5. We're living in an area, the only safe place we could go, there was a little backyard area in the back of our little tenement that was safe. We wanted first of all my mother to keep an eye. So my 2 oldest brothers went out to play. My mother's keeping an eye. I'm too young to go. They come back in with the tail. I wrote this in Fistic Knife Gun. It's the one story, everybody asked me about this story. So my oldest brother comes back and he tells my mother, as boys will do, Mom, they stole Johnny's coat. That was my second brother. And all of us were looking at Mom like, wow, what are you going to do? And my mother said to my brother Dan, and what did you do when they stole your brother's coat? My brother said, what do you mean, I didn't do anything. Those boys was tough. I didn't know. And she said, you mean you let those boys steal your brother's coat and you didn't do anything? And he tried to launch into a logical, debate about why. And she shut that down. Because in her mind, see, and this is where this thing gets deep. In her mind, she's got 4 boys. And if they become victims, their whole life is destroyed. She got to teach them to stand up and fight for themselves. And so she says to my brother Dan, she says, you better go back out there and bring that brother's coat home, because if you don't bring it home, I'm going to beat you worse than those boys. I sat there like, whoa, I'm glad I didn't go outside. This is like reality TV. I'm sitting there waiting to see what's going to happen. And so Dan comes in with the coat. He's got the coat. He's crying. He's all, anxious. But he's got the coat. And I said, okay, that's good. I hope you learned a lesson. She said, did you learn a lesson, Jeff? This is the lesson that I learned. Not the one she thought she was teaching. The lesson I learned, don't tell your mother anything. It's true. It's true. That's what I got out of that. I said, if this is how this thing goes, right? What happens in the street stays in the street. That's a dangerous lesson to learn. See, that's not bad parenting. That's not like you did. That's just the way things can be. So here's my next lesson about community. So my mother loses her job. We go on welfare, right? She just gets fired. So it's like we have no income coming in, and we have to move. We moved to Union Avenue, which I write about, which is in the South Bronx. So we go to Union Avenue, and it's like a children's paradise. See, the old place we lived, there was a lot of old people living there, no kids. Union Avenue, kids all out the street. They were playing stickball and football. It was great. We're on the fourth floor looking out the window, me and my brothers. We're like, whoa, we hit the jackpot. And I kept thinking, how do you lose your job and get to a better community? How does that work? So we're looking at the kids see us in the window, and one of the boys looks at us, he points, he takes his fist, he rubs it in his eye, and he points to us. I look at my brother, I said, what do you think that means? He said, I don't know, I think they're gonna beat us up. I was like, why? So we were a little bit more tentative this time, right? We waved a little bit, the boy did the same thing. Pointed at us, took his fist, rubbed it in his eye, and pointed back at us. I said, I think we ought to tell mom. This is like serious. So my brothers all go to me and say, look, you have the best relationship with mom. You go in and work this deal, right? So I go to my mom. It's not a hard deal to work. I go to my mom. I say, Mom, look, a group of kids downstairs, they're going to beat us up. As any good mother, she asked, why? I said, I don't know. She said, now you mean to tell me those kids going to beat you up for nothing? I said, that's what it looks like to me. She said, that doesn't make any sense. You're just scared to go outside and make friends. You'll have to quit being so timid. Go down there and make friends and quit making up this stuff. I go to my brothers and I give them the bad news. Mom ain't going to help us with this one, right? And so now here's a choice. Here was the choice. Do you stay inside or do you take your chances out there in a culture you know nothing about? We didn't know how to fight. We didn't know anything. Well, my brother John went first. He went downstairs. He had his fight. Came back, said, it don't bother me anymore. My oldest brother Dan said, not me. He never went out for the next 10 years. Me, I said, I don't know how this thing's going to go. I'm going to go and see how this thing, that's just the way it was. But there was a logic. See, there was a logic to this which we didn't understand for years, because Union Avenue was just one of many tough blocks in the South Bronx. And when I went to elementary school, guess what I found? The kids on Home Street would beat up the boys on Union Avenue. If no one ever taught you how to fight, you weren't going to be able to go to school. You weren't able to get back. So the guys thought they were actually doing you a favor by teaching you a set of skills which you were going to need for the rest of your life. So the whole thing made some kind of perverse sense in a way that was totally, totally baffling to me as a kid. Now, I have said to folk, this had nothing to do with my mother. My mother couldn't do anything for us anymore. This was about a place where the culture was working against the kids. It was something that it had its own logic to it. And I became more and more convinced about this issue of culture. Now, I will tell you, I said to you all, and I know somewhat in jest, but not really, that I knew the science behind toxic stress had to exist because I watched what happened to my friends and family. I just watched these kids fall apart. I mean, right in front of our eyes. I watched some of them end up in institutions, some end up in jail, most end up on alcohol and drugs at a very early age. It cost us family members. I lost one brother by 20. The other one functionally just sort of destroyed his life. That was the norm in our community. I just watched, and I just knew something had to be causing this. What was happening to all these boys and girls? So when I got to Bowdoin, I wanted to be an educator. That's all I ever wanted to be. I was a psych major. We didn't have an education major. We had a minor and a double major, psych and social. But what happened in my senior year, I decided to take a physiology class and a pharmacology class because I knew there was science behind what was happening in my neighborhood. So I went to take a science class. Of course, the professor said, Jeff, you haven't taken one science or math class in 4 years, and now you're a senior, and now's the time you want to do this? I don't recommend it. I said, no, I got to do this. And I took it Unfortunately, it's 1974. They didn't know about ACEs. It wasn't there. I mean, there were hints, but it wasn't there. And I was looking for it. I said, well, it has to be here somewhere. It wasn't there. And I said, damn, I thought I'd find it there. Now, this is a side note. Taking those 2 science classes almost changed my life. I almost became one of you all, right? Because this is what happened. This is just something about education, about my profession. So I take both of the classes, I get A's in the classes, and then the head of the biology department comes to me and said, Jeff, guess what? You know what happened? I said, no, what? He said, you got an A in physiology, you got an A in pharmacology. He said, you know what that means? It means you're smart. I said, oh, does it? They said, yeah, you science. This is real science. I mean, this is the pure stuff. If you could do this, you are really smart. I said, okay. He said, you know what? You could be a doctor. You could be a physician. I said, no, I don't want to be a physician. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. You want to be a physician, Jeff. It's 1974. They said, you do not want to be a teacher. I said, no, I really want to be. No, you do not. So he went after me, right? I'm all of 22, and he's just nailing me on this teacher. You make no money, no prestige. You don't want to do this with your life. Finally, he couldn't, because he got the head of the chemistry department. They tag teamed me. And finally, just wore me down. I just said, okay, I'm going to be a doctor, okay. So I had to take another semester full of science and math classes. And right as I was about to sign the contract, because they were going to give me a full ride, I decided, I don't want to be a physician. I don't like sick people, right? I don't. Sorry, Nadine. I don't want to do that. So I didn't do it. But I say that to say to folk that part of what happens in this helping profession is people have so diminished the skill level that it takes to actually do what needs to happen, that you often don't attract the best and the brightest to our work. And it's a real disservice, because in the end, no matter what the science says, someone has to do this work. And they have to do it at scale, and they have to be really, really good at what they're doing. So, place matters, community matters, but context matters. So now, I'm at the Harlem Children's Zone. It's in the 80s. Crack came from nowhere. Crack epidemic. You know what happened to crack epidemic? A funny thing happened. You know, I was working at, we were called Reedland then. Barbara knew us as Reedland before it became Harlem Children's Zone. And a funny thing started happening to my kids around 85, 86. They began to be killed. When we lost the first kid in 85, how upset we were. Young boy murdered. 2 kids, 86. 4 kids in 87. By 1989, we lost 9 kids in that one. Now now we're 13,000 kids. We weren't 13,000 kids. We were 300, 400 kids. Young boys being murdered. I started trying to figure out what in the world is going on. I mean, what is happening? It led me to the writing of Fist, Stick, Knife, Gun. But I watched the actual, what I ended up calling the codes of conduct begin to change around conflict, right? Which was based on its own logic that nobody was paying any attention to. You know, the first time 2 kids had an interaction and one had a gun, they didn't use the gun the first time. They just caused the other kid to have a gun. And you had sort of this, and then somebody shot the gun, and then somebody hit somebody, and I just watched this thing get worse and worse and worse every year. And this idea of the violence that's going on in these communities. Now, this is what I found out. So I was writing about this, I was yelling about this because it totally changed the landscape of having a kid think about, right, algebra or chemistry or physics when you really have reason to believe you may not live. Doesn't make much sense. There's no logic in that. So before we could even think about how we began to rebuild, we had to figure what we're going to do about this issue of violence. And I tell folks we're a violent nation. I'm going to say something, I'm probably getting in a little trouble. But I've heard it said over and over again, but this is how we grew up. I'm getting in trouble. People, you know, growing up as a kid, everybody told us, boys don't hit girls. Think about it. That's what they told us. Boys, but who do boys hit? Who do they hit? That's what we were told. Of course you fight. Of course you are violent with one another. Absolutely. Do you think that can be contained? Do you think if you allow a culture of aggression that at some point you're going to say, oh, I can aggress against you, but I'm not going to aggress against you. I'm not going to aggress against this child. I'm not going to aggress against the woman. I'm just going to aggress. It doesn't make any sense. This violence thing permeates our whole society, and men are taught to be violent. They are taught it. It is accepted. The violence between them is accepted. And it has changed the culture in a way for the worse, where if you're worried about killing somebody and being shot, smacking somebody, it doesn't seem like that big a deal. Just don't seem like that, like, what are you talking about? It's not real violence. Oh, we know it's real violence. But we're thinking, you've seen the death rates from homicide for young black men? It's unbelievable. And people, here's what frustrated me back in the 90s. It's frustrated me even more. You would hear about Paducah and Littleton. Some of them, you have to be around for a while to realize those were those first big mass killings at schools, white middle class, rural, suburban communities. And everybody was stunned. And you know what they say? Those kind of things don't happen here. Listen today. Next time you hear a mass shooting, that's what you'll hear. Where do they happen? They think, well, they happen in Harlem. Well, they didn't happen in Harlem the first 15 years of my career. No, they did not. Kids were not killing kids. People were not getting shot. That is new. One of the challenges I think we face as a nation, if we're going to really solve this issue, I mean for real, if we're going to scale this thing, we have to recognize these are American problems which get highlighted and first recognized usually in the most vulnerable communities. But they are not, because these folks are African American, Latino. These are American problems. And Secretary Lew showed the signs, the graphs, I believe, which is a point I make, because I think we've got to change our discussion about this and make it more universal. Even though our heart is in the right place, the most vulnerable kids, usually kids of color, are the ones who often get overlooked and end up in the worst deal. But what happens in America is people keep attributing those two sort of innate abilities, right? There's something wrong with them, that's why this is going on. They kind of almost deserve it. I have two examples. You mentioned one, the birth rates, right? I was around when Moynihan did his report. Some of you were around when Moynihan did his report. He reported the unwed birth rates in African American communities. It was in the low 20s. It was astounding. And he reported, and he said something's happening in the black community, we need to deal with it, right? Today in the white community, it's actually higher than when Moynihan reported in the black community, right? And in the black community, it's really way up there. It's in the 70s now, right? What Moynihan saw was an American problem that first was visible in communities of color. People call Moynihan a racist. They said, oh, this and that. No, he saw something. It was data. It was real data. But he started attributing it, right, to a set of characteristics about a people instead of a problem in America. I'll give you a more classic example that we should be worried about. Heroin addiction. Now, in the 60s, late 50s, early 60s, I watched heroin addiction destroy my community. I remember when there was none, and I remember what the South Bronx looked like when we had this epidemic going on. I'm talking about destroying families, community, a sense of community, people breaking into one another's homes. You didn't trust anybody. The whole thing just started to fray. And the portrayal of a heroin addict was the worst thing they found the worst looking people you could imagine, right? They had big puffy arms, they were in the streets and everything. We have a heroin epidemic in white America. It's an epidemic. I watched a special on 2020, I don't know if you saw this 22. Those were the prettiest heroin epidemics, these heroin addicts, they were gorgeous, right? I was like, look at this portrayal. What did they do? They went and found people that you would relate to, that you would be happy if they were your kids. And they said, look what's going on in America. You think anybody talk about jail, incarceration? No, they did not. They talked about treatment. Can't we get treatment? This is not good. Who's talked about it? Hillary Clinton has talked about her family. Chris Christie couldn't get more right wing, talked about his friends and heroin. Everybody's talking about, oh, this is an illness. We need to treat this thing like we just found it. Part of this issue, right, substance abuse, you saw it in our community. It's going to other communities. I think we've got to begin in this particular work around toxic stress to talk about an American problem. This is an American problem. It is impacting all kinds of kids and all kinds of families, and I will guarantee you this. There's a bunch of families who had jobs who don't have jobs anymore. Guess what's going to happen with their kids? If anybody read Bill Wilson's When Work Disappears and What Happens to Communities, and just looked at what happens when the fabric of that community is just torn up because jobs leave and people become poor and they have no plan B. Oh, and now we're going to throw a heroin epidemic on top of it. I will tell you what you're going to be seeing 10 years from now. You're going to be seeing a whole new generation of kids whose parents did not do a good job with them. Not because they're not good people, but they were busy fighting a demon. Drug addiction, no employment, folks feeling left out, angry, depressed. Oh, that's happening right now all over America. Not just in Black America or in brown America, it's happening all over America. And if we have an answer, if we believe right here, we have solutions for what needs to happen to these young people who are having this experience right now as we sit here. I think we've got to say that America needs to take this issue seriously. And if we position it just around people of color, you can get the same response around this issue we got there. Somebody will come up with a little money to do this or that, but they're not going to put the kind of resources necessary to do this. It's maybe shocking to folk. Solving this problem is not cheap. I'm going to just tell someone come in and say, oh, I got the answers. Best I know, these families are going to need real professional help. I mean, real professionals. I'm not talking about let's get, just some nice people to sit and talk with them. For a long period of time, if we're going to prepare this next generation and get them ready to enter the labor market and be successful, and that means the country's going to have to spend some money to do this. Real dollars. And if we get caught up in the regular political stuff, if folks decide this is a Democratic plan or Republican plan or one of those kind of things, I don't think we're going to get the kind of support we need to actually do this job. Because I will tell you, you name a place in this country, and I will tell you they have a crisis going on right now. You talk about the South, horror show. You go on the West Coast, been there, horror show. Doesn't matter, you go to the Midwest, oh my goodness, horror show. You go in rural America, you saw those numbers, horror show. This thing is all over America. Now, how it gets identified is going to be critical. If this thing gets identified as a problem impacting people of color, you're going to see folks deciding, no, we got better uses for our money. I understand it's a problem, but we got some other needs we got to take care of. So I think we've identified the problem clearly. I think we have science, brilliant science to back it up. Why? This is not based on, right, your IQ or anything. This is based on a set of issues that impact folks that not only debilitates the child, but actually changes that kid's chemistry moving forward. This is powerful stuff. Now the question is, how do you market this in a way that folks decide, as a nation, this is as important to us as any other crisis this country is facing. And if we can do that, I think we can potentially get some real answers to this. So it's it makes people feel like they're betraying their core values by not sort of singling out the most vulnerable, right? That you really want to say, but yeah, I understand, but did you see the maternal sort of infant mortality rates for blacks? I mean, it was way up there, and whites with it. That's okay. I saw it. Still enough white kids in there right? That this is an American problem. We better define it as such if we expect to get some real money. They're not going to throw any real money at a problem that folks feel like is just for a small part of America. Something about poverty that makes all of this worse. And we've got a whole bunch of poor kids in this country. Now, I'd like to leave you with two things that I want to focus on. One is we've got to make sure that we're doing both things at the same time. How do you really focus on early childhood for real and bring it to scale while not forgetting about the rest of that kid's life? You do all that great work for that kid, send that kid to a lousy school inside a lousy community, guess what's going to happen? Nothing you'll be proud of, right? So somehow we have to connect both of those things, and that's one issue. The other issue is that we've got to be prepared to think outside the box, and I'm going to just say this one thing and then close with a poem. Think outside the box. Part of this is we now know clearly what some of the science says. We've heard some great strategies and some solutions, but we've got to take this thing to scale, and to do that, it means that we can't simply do this the way we've been doing all of our other work. Those of you who are scientists, I know you're not necessarily in the public policy forum. That's not your thing. You're counting on somebody else to do it. I think we all got to do this together. I just don't see any other way of getting at this. We've got to continue with the great science, and I heard the questions that were answered, and I heard the questions yet to be answered. But even with what's left to be answered, we now know we need to do something about this, and we need to do it at scale. And it's going to take a public will to get that done. So part of my message to you is we've got to up the ante around public will. I just think that, with the intellectual firepower in this room, you don't need to turn much of your IQ towards this. Trust me. And if you've talked to politicians recently, now not a lot. So not a lot of your IQ needs to go to this issue. But collectively, we've got to, and I'm serious about this scale issue. Collectively, I'm not, if we come out with 10, 20, $100 million, we're not talking about anything. We've got to really go for scale. We've got to take these solutions and scale them. Scaling is not easy. Sometimes you scale, it doesn't work that well, but that's okay. That's okay. We got to do it. We can't lose another generation. We just can't I'm telling you right now, these kids are in real trouble. Right now, kids that we know of, those we work, and kids you've never thought about before, whose families are falling apart right now, they're in trouble. It's going to be bad news for the country. So let me close. I like to close my talks with poems. This particular poem I wrote because I think that people tend to think you've got to have this huge mass mobilization to get these things done. I have found a small number of very serious folks can really move the needle in some ways that are important. So let me close with this poem I wrote called A Small Army of Love. Heard the news yesterday, and today mothers cried. Our children by tens of thousands have died, and for what? What will stop this madness, the eternal sadness of small little caskets filled with dreams never had? Are we mad? We need a small army of love, and no thanks. We don't need any rifles, no guns, or no tanks, just love and help from above. Our army will be small, diverse, and unique. Little soldiers with braids and some with sneakered feet, all marching for peace and an end to the war that has claimed little soldiers while they open their doors and romp in the playgrounds. Can we stand anymore? We need a small army of love, start today. Sentries on guard, keeping danger away while our kids go to school and play on our streets. A small army of us standing guard while they sleep. can't be done. And the love of our army will always sustain us when others disdain us with laughs, ridicule. Our love keeps us fighting, yes, we're fighting fools. So I know what's been whispered and what some said aloud, those fools with their pipe dreams, their heads in the clouds. But if you love all the children, there's nothing to do but start a small army of love, me and you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Do I have time for questions or no? Do I have time for questions? Can I take some questions? Thank you. Okay, great. So Barbara tells me that we have time for a few questions. Yes, so if folks have questions, I'm happy to answer. I'll tell everybody, answer any question you have on anything. I will just tell you I'm very opinionated. I may not be right, but anyone? Yes, please. Yes.
Talk about parenting.
Yes.
And what a minimal impact that is. Almost everything I do is about the micro analytics of parenting. What could you speak to maybe the adverse effects of working with having this big problem be focused so much on parenting, but also for those of us like myself who are doing nothing but parenting.
Yeah. So that's great. Now, Ann, where's Ann? Ann is here. There's Ann Isom. She's the new CEO of the Harlem Children's Zone. We've worked with one another for years. We have this conversation about parents all the time. So I tell folks we break our parents into three groups. There are a group of our parents who love us. We start at birth. We stay with our kids, get them in college, get them through college. They're like, you guys are great. There are a group of our parents that with push and shove, they'll join us, right? You got to show up. You got to do this. And there are about a third of our parents who have substance abuse issues, mental health issues. They themselves are holding on by their fingernails and sometimes not even doing that. We work with all three groups. We do not count that last group is going to be able to provide the support and nurturing to get their kids where they need to be. Those families are going to need additional help and support, and their kids are, and we're going to have to make up somewhat for what parents are doing. What we believe is if you can get those parents early and stay with them and keep a relationship, you really raise the opportunity for those parents to be sort of more successfully engaged. But in the community, we intentionally go into communities, in our community in Harlem, where the parents have all of these issues. And Ann knows, we tell our staff all the time, I know that parent cursed you out. We meant to do that. Right? It wasn't like a shock to us that we had parents who are angry, disappointed, feel like no one cares about them, are liable to use language that, those are our people, those are our customers. We want to get that person in a different place, but we can't sort of say, because of that, we don't feel like your child will be successful. If you look at our success rates, you get no extra credit if your parent cooperated or they did not. We want to see the same graduation rates and other things for these kids, regardless. So I think parenting, we spend a lot of time on this, but we think you got to have an additional plan because for some of us, that kid is only going to be 2 for 1 year, and we may not get that parent in a great place in that 1 year. That might be a longer process for us, and we want to make sure that kid has a good 2-year-old experience. Yes, please.
I was really interested to hear your conversation about these things as America's problem rather than a problem of a specific group. We talk about this a lot in public health about shifting population needs rather than looking at the tails of a distribution. And for example, in Head Start, there was an argument that this should be a universal program like public school rather than focused on poor communities. So I would like you to, could you talk a little more about how you can imagine approaching this as an American problem instead of...
I think so. Here's the way these problems get framed, right? News, magazines. So if someone wants to show a child, right, who's struggling with ACEs, the tendency of the newscaster is to try and find a kid of color to put on with a parent to make the point, right? To get us some, and that's happening all the time. So people begin to just associate, right, those issues with people of color, and then trying to broaden that conversation. So we say this is more of what America. Now look, I will tell you, when the President Obama last summer had a number of us over at the White House, we were talking about education, and with Secretary Duncan, and Common Core came up. And what I said was, the reason Common Core was the raising of standards, education standards for all kids, the reason that was going to be defeated was that in suburban schools, they did not want to admit their schools were lousy, and when they got that data, they were going to rebel. I said it wasn't going to happen in the Chicagos, the Detroits, the Harlems. It was going to happen out on Long Island and Connecticut. And so then Arnie Duncan the next week, it wasn't because of me, said a Common Core is going to be turned back by white suburban housewives. Nah, I didn't say it like that. That didn't go over well, right? But the point of it is that this race issue, even in education. So I just sent around something that really talked about the number of kids, the percentage of kids graduating from college between 16 and 24. It was like 10%. I don't even want to say that number. It sounds so unbelievable to me. It was unbelievable. I was like, people think this is a minority problem. They don't realize this is an American problem. So when you talk about free college, guess who everybody thinks you're talking about? Hey, you're talking about these kids, not their kids. They're like, yeah, I'm going to have to pay. Getting these ideas more global to me is really critical. And I just think how it gets positioned, how it gets talked about, who goes on the newscast, what do they say, what gets published in the magazine, what pictures they use. That's how this thing, I think, has to be handled. We've got to begin to change public perception, and we've got to start reaching out in some ways unimaginable. By the way, no one is following the issue of what's happening, I think, in working class white America, right? I think that shocked everybody that, oh, there's a problem there. Well, some of us have been yelling about that for a while, but I don't think anyone's paying attention. And now that we're focused on those groups, I'm thinking we can have some more universal conversations. I'm an optimist. I hope that's the case, but I'm hoping we can have some more, because their kids are having the same problems, and their families are having the same problems. And guess whose life expectancy is going down, right? It's in that group. So now's the time to talk about more universal. Nadine.
I just wanted to add a tiny comment there. This is why the importance of data, I feel, and also even, I'll say screening. Because in California, when we looked at the data, 16.7% of Californians have an ACE score of 4 or more. There are more white people in California with a score of 4 or more than there are black people in California.
That's the issue. That's the issue.
Right? This is
issue.
an American issue.
That's the
And
issue.
the only other thing I want to say is, Jeff, you are a healer. You have been healing children, and we know this.
Thank you. Thank you. I got the time. I'll just take 1, 2, 3 really quickly. Yes?
All right, so one might have an impression from today that it's the enlightened medical community that has a responsibility, or government, state, local. You're talking about doing this in states, federal government. Where's corporate America?
Oh boy, I see now you want to ask me a question I can't answer. So this is what I have found. There's a group of sort of young entrepreneurs who are very powerful and very wealthy, who I think are a much better group to have this conversation with than the head of Nabisco. I'm not picking on Nabisco. I don't know the head of Nabisco. I'm just saying, right, as an issue, it just seems like this other group is more prepared to invest. I think the real challenge is we've got to come up with real solutions, because no one wants to waste their money, and I think that's where the data really matters, that we've got some RCT and some other data that says this is a good investment. I don't want to sort of say there's nothing there, and I think the head of Starbucks has sort of been really pushing on some of these issues, and I think there's some other folks who have, but I see this other group as more likely. I sort of, yes, please, and then I just have this last one right there, and then I'm...
I have a question about the politics of this. I agree with you 100% that this is an American problem, like, for example, Mitch McConnell, senator from Kentucky, where
Mitch.
the level of drug abuse
Yep.
and maleducation is probably worse than in any state in New England. But how would you suggest that we get Mitch McConnell and
Yeah.
Senator Rubio
Yeah.
and a lot of the conservative Republicans
Yeah.
on board with these things that the Democrats will get on board, or at least most of them will. But how do we make this a collaboration instead of a butting heads with them?
So you're right. And what I think Mitch McConnell and a bunch of other major Republican leaders are going to go back and try and understand what's going on in their districts right now. Because they've been living in a fantasy world. And I think that fantasy is unraveling in front of their eyes, right? That this is all about tax cuts and other things. It's really not about services. And, a government shouldn't be involved. Well, their communities are really falling apart. And I think they could ignore it up till now. I think Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, I think, have forced both parties to reevaluate what they know about their own constituencies. And I'm hoping that we're going to have some opportunities for talk there. I'll say this, and this is, I'm a Democrat, so I'll say that. I have a lot of Republican friends. The challenge, so here's the challenge. There's something called okie doke. It's a Bronx term, right? That's what the okie doke is if you're playing basketball, a guy only has one move. That's it. And you keep falling for it, we call that the okie doke. Don't go for the okie, saying he only got one move. Why do you keep jumping? So just remember, when Clinton left office, remember what the budget surplus was? $1 trillion. I went to the Clinton folks right before they left. Said, look, you got $1 trillion. Let's do some stuff. I mean, it's real money. We can spend a couple of $100 billion. They said, Jeff, rainy day fund. You ever hear about it? I said, nope. They said, aha, you got to have a rainy day fund, whatever. I said, we can't spend the money. He said, no, you can't spend the money. Bush got in. 6 months later, we're $1 trillion deficit. That's just politics. See, so we have the money. That's just politics. The question is, do we have the political will? And I'm hoping, here's what I think about Mitch McConnell. I don't know that anyone's organizing in his district saying we need to make real investments in early childhood education. So that message comes back to him so somehow we have to have that conversation and think about it differently. Last question was over here. Yes, please.
So kind of pushing on this issue a little more and responding to Dr. Lee's comments about silos and political will. You went first and others are trying to scale what you've done, but what advice would you have for going across agencies at the federal level and getting folks to work together to support an ambitious?
Well, look, I think, and I have a feeling this will happen in the Clinton administration. I think, I'm sorry, I think it's gonna. I mean, you're laughing, but you better hope I'm right. All right, that's all I'm gonna say. So to keep this totally non-political, get Barbara in any trouble. So there was a real affinity for some of these ideas at HUD, at HSS, in education, right? Each one of them had a massive, right, integrated, comprehensive plan for their communities, right? Choice neighborhoods, promise neighborhoods. They did these, but you had a Congress that I don't care what the president proposed, they weren't going to fund it. I don't care. What I wanted them to say was, he should have said you should cut all of these programs. Maybe they would have funded them, right? They would just know. And the problem is that you have people with the right ideas and no money going in, right, to actually back some of this stuff up. So here's the tendency is to reinvent the wheel. The tendency is to come in and say, okay, we need to figure out, we actually now have in place some constructs that if they were fully funded, could actually go in and make major investments in communities, and not just in one little area, but in comprehensive areas. What we need is someone who's bold enough to say, we need to spend $3, $4, $5 billion and invest it in this way in these communities to get this done. That is nothing in the American economy or in the budget. It is nothing. You have heard no one say it. They've said some things about, this, that, but no one said we need to make massive investments in children like this. And that's peanuts in comparison to what this budget looks like. So I'm hoping that we can continue to have these conversations that says for the first time, we actually have comprehensive strategies that just don't have funding. We just haven't taken this stuff to scale. Let's not come up with a brand new program. Let's really fund what's out there right now that will work if it's ever given a chance to fund. You all have been great. Thank you very much.